Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
Somewhere, on a world you have never heard of, in a sector of space so far from holy terror that the light of the Astronomicon flickers like a dying candle, a young man is being pulled from his bed. It is not yet dawn. The air smells of smoke and cold metal, and something else, something chemical and sterile, that he will later learn is the scent of promethium fuel being loaded into transports. He does not know where he is going. He does not know that within the span of a single standard year, everything he has ever known, his family, his village, the familiar arc of his world's pale sun across a lavender sky, all of it will have faded into a memory so distant it might as well belong to someone else entirely. He does not know that the Imperium of man considers him a resource, not a person, not a soul worthy of the Emperor's individual attention. A resource, a line item on a logistics report filed by an adept of the Departamento Munitorum who has never held a weapon, and never heard the scream of a dying friend, never tasted the copper tang of blood mixed with trench mud. He is a number now. He just does not know it yet. This is how it begins for the overwhelming majority of the Astra Militarum, the organization known more commonly in the Low Gothic tongue as the Imperial Guard. Not with glory, not with the soaring hymns and sacred rituals that mark the ascension of a space marine into the ranks of the Adeptus Astartes. Or there are no gene seeds implanted into his body, no years of careful augmentation that will transform him into something more than human. He will receive no power armor, no bolt weapon that fires self-propelled explosive rounds capable of detonating inside a target's body. He will be given a lasgun, a suit of flak armor, a small black book full of prayers and lies, and a one-way ticket to whatever corner of the galaxy currently needs more bodies to throw into the grinding machinery of war. And he will go, because he has no choice, because the Imperium demands it, because on every single world that falls under the dominion of the God Emperor of mankind, there exists an obligation, a tithe, a tax paid not in currency or goods, but in human lives. The imperial tithe requires each world to surrender roughly 10% of its planetary defense forces to the Astra Militarum every single year. That might sound manageable until you consider the scale of what we are talking about. The Imperium spans 1 million worlds. Some of those worlds are hive planets with populations numbering in the tens of billions, crammed into towering city spires where humanity lives stacked upon itself in conditions that would make the most overcrowded cities of our own history look like pastoral countryside by comparison. 10% of the armed forces of a hive world can mean millions of soldiers from a single planet in a single year. Multiply that across 1 million worlds, and the number becomes something the human mind was simply never designed to process. Trillions. Trillions of new guardsmen tithed into service every single standard year, fed into the vast digestive tract of the imperial war machine, and the Departamento Munitorum, the bureaucratic organ responsible for managing all of this, cannot even keep an accurate count of how many soldiers it has under arms at any given time. The lists of new recruits and the toll of casualties can run into the millions in a single day. Let that settle for a moment. Millions of casualties in a single day. And that is considered normal. That is considered the cost of doing business in the 41st millennium. That is the price of holding back the darkness for one more rotation of one more planet around one more dying star. So tonight, let us talk about what it truly means to be one of those numbers. Let us walk through the life of an Imperial Guardsman, from the moment of recruitment to whatever end awaits, and let us be honest about every single step of that journey. Because in the stories we tell about the Warhammer 40,000 universe, it is easy to become seduced by the grandeur of space marines and the terrible magnificence of chaos gods and the ancient mystery of the Eldari. But the true horror of this setting, the thing that makes it genuinely disturbing when you sit with it long enough, is not found in the demigods or the demons. It is found in the ordinary people. The billions upon billions of ordinary men and women who stand in the path of every conceivable nightmare the galaxy can produce, armed with weapons that might as well be flashlights and wearing armor that might as well be cardboard, and who fight anyway because that is all they can do, because the alternative is worse, and because the commissar standing behind them with a bolt pistol has made it very, very clear what happens to those who run. This is the disturbing reality of being a guardsman, and it is far worse than you think. The scale of the Astra Militarum defies language. It has been said by those imperial scholars with a taste for grim poetry that if every guardsman currently under arms were to form a single column, it would stretch from Holy Terror all the way to the hive world of Armageddon. Whether that claim is literally true is beside the point. The point is that it might be. That such a statement can even be entertained as plausible gives you some sense of the numbers we are dealing with. And every single one of those numberless billions is a person with a name and a history and a family and a set of fears and hopes and memories that make them uniquely, irreplaceably human. And every single one of them has been reduced to a number on a logistics report as a unit of resource to be deployed, expended, and replaced as the strategic situation demands. The Imperium does not waste bullets, it wastes people, because people are cheaper to produce and easier to replace than almost any other resource in its vast arsenal. Let us follow one of those people. Let us walk in his boots, if only for a little while, and see what the galaxy looks like from a height of 5 feet and 10 inches, through eyes that have never been augmented, through a body that has never been enhanced, carrying a weapon that costs less to manufacture than a single bolt round fired by a Space Marine's sidearm. Let us begin where every guardsman's story begins, with the moment the Imperium reaches into your life and takes you away from everything you have ever known. The process by which this happens varies enormously from world to world, because the Imperium of man is not a monolithic culture. It is a loose collection of 1 million different civilizations, each with its own traditions, its own social structures, its own relationship with the distant bureaucracy of terror. On some worlds, service in the Imperial Guard is considered an honor. Young men and women compete for the privilege of being selected, seeing it as a path to glory, or at the very least, an escape from whatever wretched conditions define life on their homeworld. The hive-gangers of Necromunda might welcome the chance to trade the endless gang wars of the Underhive for something that at least comes with regular meals and a weapon that was manufactured this millennium. The children of Cadia, before its destruction, were raised from birth to be soldiers, holding laser guns before they could properly walk, trained in the art of war as naturally as children on other worlds might learn to read or tend crops. For Cadians, the tithe was not a burden imposed from outside, but a fundamental expression of who they were as a people. They lived on the doorstep of the Eye of Terror, that great wound in reality where the warp bleeds into real space, and they understood better than almost anyone in the galaxy what was at stake. But Cadia was the exception, not the rule. On most worlds, the tithe is exactly what it sounds like. A tax, a demand made by distant masters who speak with the authority of the God Emperor himself, and whose representatives arrive with enough armed force to ensure compliance. The planetary governor is responsible for meeting the tithe, and the consequences of failure are severe. Governors who cannot provide the required number of soldiers have been known to face summary execution, their worlds subjected to even harsher demands as punishment for their inadequacy. And so the governor does what governors have always done when powerful institutions demand human bodies. He takes them from those least able to resist: the poor, the desperate, the criminal, the politically inconvenient, the sons and daughters of families who lack the wealth or connections to secure exemptions. On feudal worlds, entire villages might be emptied of their young men in a single sweep, loaded onto transport shuttles, and lifted into orbit before they fully understand what is happening. On hive worlds, press gangs move through the lower levels with the casual efficiency of predators culling a herd, scooping up underhive scum and mid-hive laborers alike. Some worlds use a lottery system, a thin veneer of fairness painted over a process that everyone understands is rigged in favor of those who can afford to rig it. Others simply round up their prison populations and dump them into uniform, as reasoning that criminals condemned to hard labor might as well be condemned to something more useful to the Imperium. And then there are the worlds where conscription is total and absolute, where the threat is so immediate, so existential, that every single able-bodied citizen is pressed into service regardless of age, gender, or station. When a hive fleet descends upon your world, or a massive greenskin invasion force drops out of the sky. Yet the niceties of selective recruitment evaporate very quickly. Everyone fights. Everyone dies. The only question is the order in which those two things happen. Once selected, the new recruit is separated from their previous life, with a finality that most people in our own world would find difficult to comprehend. It is not considered likely that any Guardsman will return to their world of origin. That is not speculation or pessimism. That is official Departamento Munitorum policy. A fading memory of home is described in official imperial documents as one of the average Guardsman's most constant companions. You are not going home. You are never going home. Your world will continue to exist, presumably, somewhere out there among the stars, but you will never see it again. The people you loved will grow old and die without you. The places you knew will change beyond recognition. And by the time you have served long enough to earn any kind of consideration for reassignment, assuming you survive that long, you will have been so thoroughly transformed by the experience of war that the person who left that world no longer exists in any meaningful sense. The training that follows recruitment is, like everything else in the Imperial Guard, wildly inconsistent. Some regiments, particularly those raised from worlds with strong military traditions, arrive at their first deployment already well-trained and well-equipped. While the Cadian shock troops were legendary for their discipline and combat readiness, the Katakan jungle fighters raised on one of the most dangerous death worlds in the galaxy, where the very plants will kill you if you stand still too long, required almost no additional training because simply surviving childhood on Katakan was training enough. The Vostroyan firstborn sent their eldest sons to war as a matter of sacred tradition and cultural obligation. And those sons arrived already forged by a society built around the expectation of military service. But many regiments are not like that. Many are drawn from worlds where the population has no particular martial tradition, where the concept of organized warfare is as alien as the enemies they will soon face. For these recruits, training is often brutally compressed. The novel 15 Hours, one of the most grimly honest depictions of life in the Imperial Guard ever written in the setting's fiction, follows a young farm boy named Arvin Lahn who receives approximately 4 months of basic training before being shipped to the front lines. 4 months. To prepare a teenager for a war against enemies that have been fighting since before humanity's ancestors climbed down from the trees. And Lahn is actually better off than some. Due to a bureaucratic error, and a mistake in the incomprehensibly vast filing systems of the Departamento Munitorum, he ends up on the wrong planet, fighting in the wrong war zone, deployed to a city called Brusharok, where the Imperial forces have been locked in a grinding war of attrition against millions of Orc warriors for over a decade. The life expectancy of a replacement guardsman on the front lines of Brusharok is calculated at 15 hours. 15 hours. That is all the galaxy expects of you. If that is the sum total of your value to the Imperium's military calculus. If you can survive 15 hours, you have exceeded expectations. If you can survive a day, you are a veteran. If you can survive a week, you are either extraordinarily skilled, extraordinarily lucky, or both. And the distinction between those two things becomes meaningless in the trenches of the 41st millennium. And we have not even discussed the journey between recruitment and deployment. The guardsman must travel from his homeworld to whatever war zone the Munitorum has assigned him to, and in the Imperium of Man, interstellar travel is an experience that would test the sanity of even the most resilient individual. Imperial troop transports are not luxury liners. They are vast, industrial vessels designed to move the maximum number of bodies across the maximum distance at the minimum cost. The troop decks are cavernous, poorly lit, poorly ventilated, and packed with thousands of soldiers sleeping in hammock racks stacked 4 or 5 high. The air is thick with the smell of bodies and recycled atmosphere, and the ever-present incense burned by the ship's clergy to ward off evil spirits, which in the case of warp travel is not merely a superstitious gesture, but a genuine, if limited, defensive measure against the predatory entities that swim through the Imperium. Because that is the other thing. To travel between the stars, the transport must enter the warp, the Imperium, that screaming hell dimension of raw psychic energy that the Imperium uses as a shortcut through the physical universe, like a boat cutting through a storm-tossed sea, relying on its Geller field to maintain a bubble of stable reality around the ship, while the nightmares of a billion tortured souls claw at the hull. The Guardsman is not told what the warp is. He is told not to look at the viewports during transit. He is told to pray. As he is told that the strange sounds he hears in the corridors and the flickering shadows at the edge of his vision are normal and nothing to be concerned about. He is told all of these things by people who know they are lying, and he believes them, or pretends to, because the truth would be so much worse. Warp travel is unpredictable. A journey that should take weeks can take months. Months can become years, in rare but documented cases. And a troop transport can emerge from the warp only to discover that decades, or even centuries, have passed in the real universe, while the ship's crew and passengers experienced only days. Imagine arriving at your assigned war zone and discovering that the war you were sent to fight ended 50 years ago. That the regiment you were meant to reinforce was destroyed a generation before you arrived. That the enemy you were trained to face has been replaced by something entirely different, while something your training never prepared you for, something that the uplifting primer does not mention because the primer was written before this particular threat existed. This happens. Not often in the grand scale of Imperial logistics, but often enough that the Munitorum has standard procedures for dealing with temporarily displaced regiments. And those procedures are exactly as compassionate as you would expect, which is to say, not at all. You are reassigned, re-equipped if necessary, and sent back into the fight, because the Imperium has no use for guardsmen who are not fighting, regardless of how much time has passed or how disoriented they might be. Before you reach those trenches, however, you will be given your equipment. And with that equipment comes a small black book, the Imperial Infantryman's uplifting primer, and it is here that the Imperium begins to lie to you in earnest. The primer is a standard issue publication of the Departamento Munitorum, provided to every single guardsman upon their entry into service. It is supposed to be a field manual, a guide to survival and combat that will prepare the common soldier for the challenges ahead. And in some respects, it fulfills that function. It contains instructions on how to maintain your lasgun, how to dig a foxhole, how to perform basic first aid, how to set frag grenades as booby traps, and how to comport yourself according to Imperial military regulations. It includes prayers and litanies to the God Emperor, which in a universe where faith can literally shield you from the corruption of chaos, might actually have some practical value. It details the chain of command and the importance of discipline. It even includes a helpful list of all the ways you can be executed for various infractions, which is rather extensive and covers everything from losing your equipment to looking at a commissar the wrong way. But woven into all of this genuinely useful information is a thick layer of propaganda, so outrageous, so divorced from reality, that veteran guardsmen are known to refer to their copies as toilet paper. And some use them for exactly that purpose. The primer describes the enemies you will face in terms that would be laughable if the consequences of believing them were not so frequently fatal. Orcs, those towering mountains of muscle and aggression that live for nothing but violence and grow stronger the more they fight, are described as cowardly and weak. The primer assures you that greenskins will break and flee at the first sign of determined resistance. Genestealers, bioengineered killing machines with claws capable of shearing through ceramite power armor, are described as having blunt claws and slow reflexes. The primer encourages you to engage them in close combat with your bayonet. And the Aeldari, whose technology is so advanced, it makes Imperial equipment look like Stone Age tools by comparison, are dismissed as physically frail and technologically backwards, their shuriken weapons supposedly unable to penetrate standard issue flak armor. Every single one of these assertions is a lie. The primer knows it. The people who wrote it know it. And after your first engagement, you will know it too. The orc that charges your position will not flee at the sight of your laser gun. And it will keep coming, soaking up last fire with a body mass that would put a grizzly bear to shame, driven by a genetically encoded need for violence that no amount of damage can deter until the damage is sufficient to physically destroy its body. The Genestealer will not politely wait for you to fix your bayonet. It will close the distance between you faster than your eyes can track, and its claws will open you from throat to groin before you even register that it has moved. And the Aeldari shuriken weapon that the Primer told you was harmless will punch through your flak armor like it is made of wet parchment, because it essentially is, relative to the forces being applied. Why does the Imperium do this? Why does it deliberately misinform the soldiers upon whom its survival depends? The answer is the same answer that explains almost everything about the Imperium of man: a combination of institutional inertia, callous pragmatism, and a fundamental disregard for the value of individual human life. The Premier is not designed to help Guardsmen survive. It is designed to get them to the front lines without breaking. A Guardsman who understands the true nature of the threats he faces might refuse to fight. He might desert. He might simply collapse under the weight of the knowledge that he is being sent to die against enemies that outclass him in every conceivable way. But a Guardsman who believes, even briefly, even for those crucial first few hours of combat, that his weapons are adequate and his enemies are manageable, that Guardsman will advance into the killing zone. And in the calculus of the Imperium, that is all that matters. Get the bodies to the front. The enemy will take care of the rest. The more cynical reading, and the one that most veteran Guardsmen eventually arrive at, is that the Imperium does not expect its soldiers to survive long enough for the Primer's lies to matter. Or see, if the average life expectancy of a replacement Guardsman on an active front is measured in hours, then the Primer only needs to keep its reader functional for hours. By the time the lies are exposed, you are either dead, which means it no longer matters, or you are a survivor who has learned the truth through direct experience, which means you no longer need the book. Either way, the Primer has served its purpose. But there is something deeply unsettling about an institution that lies to the people it sends to die. Not the enemies of the Imperium, not the alien or the heretic or the mutant, but its own soldiers. The men and women who carry its standard and fight its wars and bleed into the soil of 1,000 different worlds. The Imperium lies to them because it does not trust them with the truth. And it does not trust them with the truth because the truth might make them less willing to die. Well, let us talk about what you are actually carrying when you step onto the battlefield, because understanding the equipment of an Imperial Guardsman is essential to understanding the horror of their situation. Your primary weapon is the laser gun, and in the grand hierarchy of weapons that exist in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, the laser gun occupies a position that can only be described as deeply unfortunate. Now, to be fair, the laser gun is not a bad weapon by our standards. Not even close. A standard pattern laser gun fires a concentrated beam of laser energy that can blow a limb off an unarmored human target, burn through light cover, and deliver consistent, accurate fire at ranges that would embarrass most modern military rifles. Its power pack can be recharged by leaving it in direct sunlight, or in a pinch, by throwing it into a fire, which gives it a logistical advantage that no chemically propelled projectile weapon can match. It almost never jams. It requires minimal maintenance. It is simple enough that a conscript with a few hours of training can operate it effectively. In the context of fighting other humans, rebels, cultists, renegade planetary defense forces, the laser gun is perfectly adequate. It will kill what you point it at, and it will do so reliably, consistently, and cheaply. The problem is that the Imperial Guard does not only fight other humans. The Imperial Guard fights everything. And against almost every other enemy in the 41st millennium, the laser gun is outclassed to a degree that borders on the absurd. Against an orc, a creature whose biology allows it to shrug off wounds that would kill a human 3 times over, a single laser gun shot is unlikely to be more than an irritation. You need volume of fire, concentrated, sustained, disciplined volleys from entire squads, focusing their shots on single targets to bring down even an ordinary orc boy. And orc boys are the cannon fodder of the greenskin war machine. The larger specimens, the knobs and war bosses, can soak up even more punishment. Against Tyranids, the situation is similar. The basic termagant may be individually fragile, but they come in swarms of such density that your lasgun's rate of fire becomes irrelevant long before you run out of targets. And if a Tyranid warrior or something larger gets close, your lasgun might as well be a torch. A very small, very inadequate torch. Against Chaos Space Marines, your lasgun is functionally useless. These are post-human warriors encased in power armor that was designed to withstand the rigors of battle in the most hostile environments the galaxy can produce. Your las bolt will scorch the paint on their ceramite plating and nothing more. To kill a Chaos Marine with a lasgun, you would need to land multiple shots on the same weak point: the joints between armor plates, the eye lenses, the flexible seals at the neck and waist, while the target is actively trying to kill you with weapons that make your lasgun look like a children's toy. The veterans of the Guard know this. They know that the lasgun's nickname, the flashlight, is cruelly appropriate in most combat situations, but the lasgun has one thing going for it that no other weapon can match: quantity. There are more lasguns in the Imperium than there are stars in the sky, and when 100 Guardsmen fire in unison, when 1,000 fire in unison, the cumulative effect of all that concentrated energy becomes genuinely dangerous to almost anything. This is the fundamental tactical doctrine of the Imperial Guard. You cannot individually match your enemies, so you must overwhelm them with numbers. Your lasgun cannot kill a Chaos Marine with a single shot, but 100 lasguns firing at the same target might find enough weak points to bring it down. Your squad cannot hold against an orc charge, but a regiment can. Your regiment cannot stop a hive fleet, but an army group might slow it down long enough for the heavy armor to arrive. This is the cold mathematics of the Imperial Guard. You are not expected to be effective as an individual. You are expected to be effective as a statistic. And then there is your armor. Flak armor, the standard issue body protection provided to the vast majority of Imperial Guardsmen. It is made from multiple layers of ablative and impact-absorbent materials, primarily ceramic in composition, designed to deflect shrapnel, absorb the energy of low-velocity projectiles, and provide a modest degree of protection against glancing hits from directed energy weapons. Against the weapons commonly used by rebels and cultists, primarily stubbers and autoguns, flak armor is genuinely effective. It can stop a large-caliber rifle round without penetration. It provides real, meaningful protection in the kind of low-intensity conflicts that actually make up the majority of a guardsman's operational experience. But once again, the problems arise when you scale up the threat level. Against a bolt-around, that gyroscopic, self-propelled, mass-reactive explosive projectile fired by Space Marines and Chaos Marines alike, flak armor provides approximately the same level of protection as wearing nothing at all. And the bolt punches through the ceramic plates like they are not there, enters the body, and then detonates. Against the monomolecular edged weapons of the Eldari, flak armor is similarly irrelevant. Against the crude but devastatingly powerful weaponry of the orcs, whose shooters fire heavy caliber slugs at ranges where even their notoriously poor aim becomes statistically likely to connect, flak armor might stop a glancing hit, but will be overwhelmed by a direct impact. And against Tyranid bioweapons, which range from streams of corrosive acid to living ammunition that burrows into flesh on contact, flak armor is a mild inconvenience at best. The Guardsman knows this. After their first real engagement, every Guardsman knows this. The armor they wear is not designed to keep them alive against the galaxy's true threats. It is designed to keep them alive long enough to be useful, long enough to fire a few shots, but long enough to absorb a few hits that might otherwise have reached someone or something more valuable, long enough to contribute their small measure of violence to the vast ocean of destruction that constitutes an Imperial Guard engagement. And that is the cruel truth at the heart of the Guardsman's existence. You are not equipped to survive. You are equipped to function, briefly and efficiently, before the mathematics of the battlefield claim you, of course. The laser gun and flak armor are not the totality of the Guardsman's arsenal. The Imperial Guard fields an enormous array of supporting weapons and vehicles, from the autocannons and heavy bolters that provide platoon-level fire support to the mighty Leman Russ battle tanks that form the backbone of the Guard's armored divisions. A Guardsman assigned to a heavy weapons team, crewing a lascannon or a missile launcher, has the capability to threaten almost anything on the battlefield, including the armored targets that his laser gun cannot touch, and the artillery, the thundering batteries of basilisks and manticores and earthshaker cannons that fill the air with screaming shells from positions miles behind the front line. These are the weapons that win battles for the Imperial Guard more than any other. When the artillery speaks, everything dies, friend and foe alike. Though the Guard's artillery officers are generally skilled enough to keep the worst of the friendly fire to manageable levels. Generally, the Leman Russ battle tank deserves special mention because for many Guardsmen, the sight of one rolling forward through the smoke and chaos of a pitched battle is the closest thing to a religious experience they will ever have on the battlefield. The Leman Russ is not a sophisticated weapon. It is not elegant or fast or technologically advanced, as it is a metal box with a very large gun on it, and it embodies the Imperial Guard's design philosophy in its purest form. Build it sturdy, build it simple, and build a lot of them. Its battle cannon can reduce a building to rubble with a single shot. Its thick armor can shrug off small arms fire, most infantry portable anti-tank weapons, and even the lighter caliber weapons of enemy vehicles. And it is produced in such numbers that the Guard can afford to lose dozens of them in a single engagement and still have enough left to maintain operational capability. But the Guardsman on the ground is not a tank crewman or an artillery operator or a heavy weapons specialist. He is a rifleman, a trooper, a grunt, and his relationship with these heavier weapons is one of dependence rather than ownership. He relies on the tanks to break through enemy fortifications so that he can advance. He relies on the artillery to suppress enemy positions so that he can move without being immediately killed. He relies on the heavy weapons teams to deal with armored targets that his laser gun cannot scratch. And when those supporting elements are destroyed, disabled, or simply not available because the Munitorum shipped them to the wrong planet, the Guardsman is left with nothing but his laser gun, his flak armor, his bayonet, and whatever the Emperor sees fit to provide in the way of miracles. The bayonet. That deserves its own mention, brief but significant. Every laser gun in the Imperial Guard comes with a mounting point for a standard pattern bayonet, and bayonet drills are a mandatory part of basic training for almost every regiment. The primer devotes several pages to the proper technique for bayonet combat, including cheerfully optimistic instructions for engaging various alien species in hand-to-hand fighting. The notion that a Guardsman with a knife on a stick represents a credible threat to an Orc Nob or a Tyrannid warrior or a Chaos Space Marine is, by any rational assessment, absurd. And yet, Guardsmen fix bayonets and charge into melee combat on a regular basis, not because they expect to win, but because the fight has progressed to the point where there are no other options left. The ammunition is gone. The heavy weapons are silenced. The tanks are burning. The artillery has lost contact. And the enemy is in the trench. In that moment, the bayonet becomes the last expression of the Guardsman's refusal to surrender. It is not a weapon of victory. It is a weapon of defiance. And in the Imperial Guard, defiance is sometimes all you have. If the enemies in front of you are not enough to make you reconsider your career choices, allow me to introduce you to the man standing behind you, the Commissar. And trust me when I tell you that for many Guardsmen, the Commissar is a more immediate and more personal source of terror than any alien horror the galaxy can produce. Commissars are political officers assigned to Imperial Guard regiments by the Officio Prefectus, a subdivision of the Departamento Munitorum. Their official role is to maintain discipline, morale, and loyalty within the regiment. Their unofficial role, the one that every Guardsman understands within moments of meeting their first Commissar, is to ensure that you fear the consequences of retreat more than you fear the enemy. And the primary method by which they accomplish this is simple, direct, and devastatingly effective. They shoot people. A commissar has the absolute authority to summarily execute any member of their regiment, from the lowest conscript to the highest-ranking officer, for any failure of duty, courage, or loyalty. Cowardice in the face of the enemy, insubordination, dereliction of duty, harboring heretical thoughts, failure to maintain proper hygiene, loss of your copy of the uplifting primer. The list of offences punishable by summary execution is long, vaguely defined, and subject entirely to the commissar's personal interpretation. If a commissar decides that you have failed in your duty to the emperor, you die. There is no appeal. There is no trial. There is the bark of a bolt pistol, and then silence. The rationale behind this system is brutally pragmatic. Yet the Imperial Guard fights wars of such scale and such horror that normal human morale is insufficient to keep soldiers in the fight. When a wave of screaming greenskins crashes into your defensive line, every instinct you possess screams at you to run. When the sky turns dark with the chitinous bodies of descending tyrannid bioorganisms, the urge to flee becomes almost physical, a primal impulse burned into your DNA by millions of years of evolution. As the commissar's job is to override that impulse with something stronger, not courage, not faith, not patriotism, fear, the cold, calculated understanding that the bolt pistol behind you is a certainty, while the enemy in front of you is merely a probability. You might survive the orc charge. You will not survive the commissar. It works. That is the terrible thing. It works. Guardsmen who would otherwise break and run, who would otherwise surrender to the very natural human desire to not be torn apart by alien monsters, instead hold their positions, fire their weapons, and die at their posts because they have been conditioned to fear their own officers more than they fear death itself. The commissar system takes the most fundamental human survival instinct and turns it against itself, weaponizing fear in service of the emperor's wars. But there is a cost. Commissars are not universally loved figures within the Imperial Guard. That is an understatement on a galactic scale. They are feared, resented, and occasionally hated with a burning intensity that transcends the normal bounds of military frustration. The more diplomatic commissars, those who understand that leadership requires more than just a steady trigger finger, learn to balance the threat of execution with genuine battlefield competence and occasional displays of common humanity. But the legendary Commissar Tiaphas Cain, whose memoirs provide one of the most entertaining windows into life in the Imperial Guard, maintained his authority primarily through a carefully cultivated reputation for heroism and a genuine concern for the soldiers under his command, though he would be the first to insist that his heroics were motivated entirely by self-preservation rather than any noble sentiment.
Honestly, this is what keeps me coming back to the Guard as a topic. I think a lot of us got into 40K through the Space Marines, right? The cool armor, the bolters, the whole superhuman warrior monk thing. But the longer I spend with the setting, the more I realize the Guard is where the real story lives. Because these are just people, no GNC, no power armor, just regular men and women staring down stuff that would make a Space Marine think twice. And they do it anyway. The hits different when you sit with it. It makes the whole universe feel heavier, makes the stakes feel real. And if I'm being straight with you, the Guard is the reason 40K works as a setting. Without them, it's just gods fighting gods. With them, it's a story about what ordinary people are willing to endure when everything depends on them. And that, to me, is the heart of it. But anyways, let's keep going.
But for every Tiaphas Cain, there are dozens of commissars who rule through pure terror, who execute freely and frequently, who see the guardsmen under their authority as little more than ammunition to be expended in the Emperor's service. The Katachan Jungle Fighters, perhaps the most independently minded regiment in the Imperial Guard, are notorious for the unusually high rate of mysterious accidents that befall commissars assigned to their units. The official records describe these incidents as unfortunate casualties of combat. The unofficial explanation, and understood by everyone from the lowest trooper to the highest general, is that the Katachans simply do not tolerate commissars who overstep their bounds, and they are very, very good at making deaths look accidental when they need to be. Think about that for a moment. These are soldiers who face the horrors of the galaxy on a daily basis, who fight aliens and demons and heretics without flinching, and yet they have determined that the most dangerous threat in their immediate environment is sometimes their own political officer. That tells you everything you need to know about the psychological environment in which the average guardsman operates. The commissar is watching, always watching. When you sleep, when you eat, when you write letters home that will never be delivered to an address that may no longer exist, the commissar is evaluating your loyalty, your courage, but your devotion to the emperor. A moment of hesitation can get you killed. A question asked too loudly can get you killed. A prayer whispered to the wrong saint, or in the wrong tone, or at the wrong volume, can get you killed. You live your life balanced on the edge of a blade, and the hand holding that blade belongs to a man whose entire career has been built around the efficient disposal of human beings who fail to meet his standards. And the worst part, the truly disturbing part, you cannot even resent him openly, because resentment is insubordination, and insubordination is punishable by death. But war is not fought every moment of every day. There are pauses, lulls, hours and days, and sometimes weeks when the enemy is regrouping or repositioning, or simply has not yet arrived, and the guardsman is left to sit in his trench, or his bunker, or his foxhole, and wait. And it is in these quiet moments, paradoxically, that the true weight of the guardsman's situation often becomes most oppressive. Daily life in an Imperial Guard regiment between engagements is a study in controlled misery. The physical conditions vary enormously depending on the theatre of operations, but certain constants apply regardless of whether you are stationed in the frozen wastes of a Valhallan-style ice world or the baking heat of a Talon-pattern desert. You are always tired. Our sleep is rationed with the same cold efficiency as ammunition and food, and a guardsman learns quickly that 4 hours of fitful rest, interrupted by the distant rumble of artillery or the sudden bark of a sentry's warning, is a luxury rather than a hardship. You are always hungry. Combat rations are provided by the Departamento Munitorum in standardized packs that contain the minimum caloric intake necessary to maintain combat effectiveness. And they taste exactly as good as that description suggests. Veteran guardsmen describe them with a variety of colorful metaphors, none of which are fit for polite company, but the consensus is that they are edible in the same way that cardboard is edible, which is to say, technically, reluctantly, and only when the alternative is starvation. Water is a perpetual concern. Each guardsman is issued a canteen, but the sources available for refilling it are often contaminated, irradiated, or otherwise unsuitable for human consumption without treatment. The standard issue water purification tablets provided by the Munitorum technically render most water potable, but the resulting liquid has a salty, chemical taste that never quite leaves your mouth. On worlds where the water table has been corrupted by industrial runoff or the residue of previous battles, even treated water can cause digestive problems that range from mild discomfort to debilitating illness. As medical treatment for such conditions is, to use a generous term, inconsistent. A regimental medic can set a bone, stitch a wound, and administer basic painkillers, but the facilities for treating disease, infection, or chronic conditions are often minimal or non-existent. The standard approach to a guardsman who becomes too sick to fight is to move him to the rear and hope he recovers. If he does not recover, he is listed as a non-combat casualty in the regimental records, and a replacement is requisitioned from the Munitorum. This process can take months. Hygiene is emphasized by the primer, which includes detailed instructions on the maintenance of personal cleanliness and the prevention of disease. The primer is, for once, not lying about this. The Imperial Guard has learned through 10 millennia of experience that soldiers who do not maintain basic hygiene die of disease at rates that exceed combat casualties, and a dead soldier who never fired his lasgun is a waste of resources by any standard. So the guardsman is expected to keep himself clean, his uniform in order, and his kit maintained. Even when the trench he occupies has 6 inches of standing water at the bottom, and the nearest source of clean water is 2 miles behind the lines. across open ground that the enemy's snipers have had weeks to zero in on. The psychological conditions are, if anything, worse than the physical ones. Boredom is endemic. The stretches between engagements can last long enough for the initial terror to fade, replaced by a dull, grinding monotony that erodes the spirit in ways that combat never could. You sit in your foxhole. You clean your laser gun for the 14th time that day. You stare at the horizon and try to remember what your home looked like and find that the details have already started to blur around the edges, like a pic capture left too long in the sun. You talk to the guardsman next to you about nothing, because talking about anything real, your fears, your doubts, your homesickness, is too dangerous. The commissar is always listening. The informers are always watching. A careless word, a moment of expressed despair, a question about the purpose of the war or the wisdom of the command structure. Any of these can bring consequences that make the enemy look almost benign by comparison. And then there are the letters. Some guardsmen write letters home, addressed to families on worlds they will never see again, knowing that the letters will be read by censors, knowing that they can say nothing of substance, knowing that the chances of the letter actually reaching its destination through the Munitorum's postal system are vanishingly small, and writing them anyway, because the act of writing is itself a form of resistance against the dehumanizing machinery of the Imperial Guard. Because putting words on paper, even meaningless, censored, probably never to be delivered words, is a way of insisting that you are still a person. That you still have a name and a history and people who would grieve for you if they knew what was happening to you. That you are more than the number stamped on your identification tags. The tags themselves are a cold comfort. Made from non-corrosive metal, usually aluminum, they are stamped with your name, rank, regiment, company, and your unique Munitorum number. Officers sometimes have access codes for restricted areas added to theirs. Many guardsmen wear their tags at all times, as even off-duty, treating them as holy icons, symbols of their devotion to the Emperor, and their willingness to fight and die in his service. In practice, the tags serve a far more mundane purpose. They identify your body. When you die, and the statistical probability of that happening on any given active deployment is distressingly high, the tags are all that distinguish your remains from those of every other broken thing on the battlefield. They are how the Munitorum knows which number to cross off the list. Some guardsmen form bonds in these quiet moments between battles, friendships forged in the shared experience of waiting to die. These bonds are genuine and deep, and frequently described by veterans as the only thing that kept them sane through the worst of it. The guardsman next to you in the trench is the closest thing to family you will ever have again. And you will protect him with the same fierce instinct that you would protect a blood relative, not because the Imperium demands it, but because he is all you have left. He is the person who will share his last ration pack with you when yours is lost. He is the person who will hold your hand when you are wounded and waiting for the medic who may or may not come. He is the person who will write your name on a piece of ammunition casing and stick it in the dirt over your shallow grave when you die. Also because nobody else in the entire galaxy will remember that you existed. These friendships are the Imperial Guard's greatest strength and its greatest cruelty. Because the people you come to love in the trenches are the people most likely to die in front of you. And the cumulative weight of those losses, friend after friend after friend, falling to enemy fire, or disease, or the arbitrary violence of a commissar having a bad day, accumulates over the course of a campaign until it becomes a kind of armor in itself. Not physical armor, but emotional armor, a callus on the soul that allows you to keep functioning when all reason for functioning has been stripped away. Veterans of extended campaigns often display a flat, detached affect that civilian observers mistake for courage. It is not courage. It is the psychological equivalent of scar tissue, as the mind's defense against a pain that would be unbearable if it were felt in full. Now let us talk about the things that actually kill guardsmen. Let us talk about the enemies of the Imperium, and let us begin with the most common, the most widespread, and in many ways, the most terrifying of them all. Let us talk about the orcs. Orcs are the most numerous intelligent species in the galaxy. They may actually outnumber humanity, although reliable census data on either species is impossible to compile. They are found on virtually every world, in virtually every system, breeding and fighting and spreading with an inexorable biological imperative that has no equivalent in human experience. An orc is not born. An orc grows, from spores shed by existing greenskins, from fungal colonies that take root in the soil of conquered worlds, from the biological detritus of previous wars. Orcs emerge fully formed and ready for violence in a way that makes even the most accelerated human military training look positively leisurely by comparison. The average orc boy stands well over 6 feet tall and masses considerably more than an adult human. Its body is a masterwork of biological engineering, though not by any conscious design. Orc physiology is absurdly resilient. Their bones are thick and dense, as reinforced by a cartilaginous structure that makes them extremely difficult to break. Their blood contains symbiotic algae that accelerate healing to a degree that human medicine can only dream of. An orc can lose a limb and survive. An orc can be shot, stabbed, burned, and blown up, and as long as enough of the central body mass remains intact, it will keep fighting. Their pain tolerance is so high that injuries which would incapacitate a human barely slow them down. They have been known to continue attacking after sustaining wounds that should be immediately fatal, driven by an enthusiasm for violence that overrides every other biological imperative. And they are strong, tremendously, overwhelmingly strong. An orc boy can bend steel with its bare hands. Its crude chopper, a weapon that looks like something salvaged from a scrapyard, can cleave through flak armor and the body beneath it with a single swing. In close combat, a guardsman has essentially no chance against an orc, not 1-on-1, not even 2 or 3-on-1, unless those 2 or 3 are very skilled, very lucky, and very willing to accept casualties. The guard's doctrine against orcs is built around a single principle: keep them at range. Pour las fire, heavy weapon fire, and artillery into them before they can close the distance. Because if the orcs reach your line, if they get close enough to use those massive fists and those crude blades and that bottomless appetite for hand-to-hand slaughter, then your line is already lost. But keeping orcs at range is easier said than done, because orcs are fast. Not individually fast, not in the way of the Eldari who move with a fluid grace that seems to bend the laws of physics, but collectively fast. An orc horde moves with a momentum that is difficult to comprehend until you see it in person. Thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of bellowing greenskins surging forward in a tide of green flesh and rusting metal, driven by a collective psychic field that feeds on their shared excitement and makes them stronger, tougher, and more aggressive the more of them there are in one place. The orc war cry, that deafening, bone-shaking roar that rises from the horde as it charges, is not just sound, it is a psychic phenomenon, a manifestation of the collective orcoid consciousness that can literally shake the foundations of buildings and shatter the morale of defenders who have never experienced it before. Imagine being a guardsman on the wall of a defensive position, watching that wave approach. You have your laser gun, you have your flak armor, you have been told by your primer that orcs are cowardly and will flee at the first sign of resistance. And now you are watching them come, and they are not fleeing. They are not even slowing down. The last fire from your platoon is hitting them, and the front ranks are falling. But the ranks behind them are climbing over the bodies and screaming louder and moving faster, and they are not stopping. They are never going to stop. There are more of them than there are power packs for your laser gun. There are more of them than there are guardsmen in your entire regiment. And they want to be here. They want this fight. This is what they were born for. While you were torn from your home and given a weapon you barely know how to use and shipped across the galaxy to a planet whose name you cannot pronounce, the orcs were growing and fighting and preparing for this moment, with a joyful anticipation that no human soldier has ever felt for any battle in the history of war. That disparity between the guardsman's reluctant duty and the orc's boundless enthusiasm is perhaps the most demoralizing aspect of fighting greenskins. You do not want to be here. They do. You are terrified. They are excited. You are fighting to survive. They are fighting because fighting is the closest thing their species has to a reason for existing. And in the calculus of violent conflict, motivation matters. The Guardsman fights because he must. The Orc fights because it loves to. And love, even the brutish, uncomplicated love of an Orc for a good scrap, is a more powerful motivator than duty ever could be. All the lucky Guardsmen are the ones deployed against Orc forces that have not yet reached critical mass, scattered warbands, and isolated raiding parties that can be contained and destroyed by concentrated firepower before they grow large enough to become truly dangerous. The unlucky ones face what the Orcs call a full-scale mobilization, one of those vast migration wars that sweep across entire sectors like a green tide, consuming everything in their path and growing stronger with every conquest. Against such a force, the Imperial Guard's doctrine of attrition becomes a grim irony. You are trying to outlast an enemy that literally grows more numerous the longer the war continues. Every Orc spore shed on the battlefield will produce new fighters. Every Imperial world conquered provides resources and raw materials for the Orc war machine. Every battle, win or lose, makes the greenskins stronger. You cannot starve them out. You cannot outlast them. But you can only kill them in sufficient numbers, fast enough, to break the momentum of their advance before it becomes unstoppable. That is what is expected of the Guardsman. Stand in the path of the green tide. Fire your laser gun until the power pack runs dry. Fix your bayonet when the Orcs reach your trench. And die, if necessary, buying time for the heavy armor to arrive, for the artillery to find its range, for the Space Marines to deploy from orbit, for whatever salvation might eventually come from the void ships hovering in orbit above a world that may already be lost. That is your role. That is your purpose. That is the sum total of your contribution to the Imperium's endless war. To stand and to fire and to die with your boots in the mud and your laser gun in your hands and the Emperor's name on your lips. The veterans who have fought against Orcs and survived will tell you things that the primer never mentions. They will tell you about the smell, which is the first thing that hits you. A thick, fungal musk mixed with the acrid stench of crude promethium fuel and unwashed bodies that announces the presence of a greenskin horde long before you can see them. They will tell you about the noise, that guttural roar that begins as a distant rumble and builds and builds and builds until it fills the entire world, drowning out the sound of your own heartbeat, your own screaming, your own last fire, and until the only thing left in the universe is the sound of a million green throats bellowing their joy at the prospect of violence. They will tell you about the ground shaking, literally shaking, as the mass of the horde transmits its kinetic energy through the soil and into your bones, making your teeth rattle and your vision blur. And they will tell you about the silence that comes after. When the battle is over, when the Orcs have been driven back or destroyed or simply moved on to find a more entertaining fight elsewhere, the silence that descends on the battlefield is unlike anything you have experienced before. It is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of something else, something heavy and oppressive that fills the space where the screaming used to be. You stand in your trench, surrounded by the bodies of friends and enemies alike, and the quiet presses against your eardrums like water pressure at depth, and you realize that you are alive, that you should not be alive, that every statistical model and every tactical assessment and every personal instinct you possess told you that you would be dead by now. And yet here you stand, breathing and bleeding and trembling, and you do not know whether to laugh or cry or scream. So you just stand there, in the silence, and you wait for the shaking to stop. It never really stops. And the veterans will tell you that too, if you ask them. The shaking never really stops. If the Orcs represent the overwhelming tide of brute force, then the Tyranids represent something far worse. Something that reaches deeper into the primal fears, hardwired into the human brain, and twists them into new and terrible shapes. The Tyranids are not just an enemy, they are a hunger, a vast, cold, as calculating hunger that has crossed the void between galaxies with the singular purpose of consuming every scrap of biological matter in its path. An orc, for all its savagery, is something you can understand. It is a living creature with motivations. However alien those motivations might be, it fights because it wants to. It conquers because it can. There is a logic to its behavior, a pattern that human intelligence can recognize and, to some degree, predict. You can outthink an orc, not easily and not always, but it can be done. You cannot outthink a tyrannid, not in any meaningful sense, because the individual tyrannid organism does not think, it does not want, it does not feel fear or pain or joy or anger. It is a biological tool, a weapon grown from living tissue, directed by a vast psychic intelligence called the hive mind that exists beyond the comprehension of any individual consciousness. The tyrannid that charges your position is not brave, it is not committed, and it does not have a sense of duty or a desire for glory. It is simply fulfilling its function in the same way that a bullet fulfills its function after leaving the barrel of a gun. It was grown for this moment, designed for this specific engagement. And when it dies, if it dies, the hive mind will note its loss with the same emotional investment that you would note the expenditure of a single round of ammunition. For the Guardsman, fighting tyrannids is an experience that strips away the last vestiges of the comfortable lies they have been told about the nature of war. War against other humans has rules, conventions, a shared framework of behavior that, even when violated, provides a structure for understanding what is happening. War against orcs has a certain brutal simplicity that the human mind can grasp, but war against tyrannids is war against something that does not recognize the concept of war at all. The tyrannids do not make war, they feed. You are not their enemy, you are their food. And the distinction between those two things, between being fought and being consumed, is the difference between a horror you can face with courage and a horror that dissolves courage entirely. The first sign of a tyrannid invasion is usually the shadow, literally. As a hive fleet approaches a world, the sheer biomass of the fleet, billions of individual organisms ranging from ship-sized biovessels to microscopic spores, creates a psychic shadow that blocks out the light of the Astronomicon. Astropathic communication, the Imperium's primary method of faster-than-light messaging, becomes impossible. The world is cut off, isolated, alone. And then the sky begins to darken as the vanguard organisms enter the atmosphere, not as invaders, but as a weather system, as a biological storm that rains spores and infiltration organisms across the planet's surface, like the first drops of a flood that will eventually swallow everything. By the time the main assault begins, the defenders have usually been softened by weeks or months of this preliminary infestation. Genestealer cults, those insidious networks of human-alien hybrids that infiltrate planetary populations generations before the fleet arrives, rise up to sabotage defenses and sow chaos. As the infrastructure that the defenders depend on, communications, power grids, supply lines, breaks down under the combined weight of sabotage and the growing psychic pressure of the approaching hive mind. Morale, already strained by the knowledge of what is coming, collapses in units that lack strong leadership or particular faith. And then the creatures come. Waves of them. Endless, shrieking, chittering waves of biological horror that pour across the landscape like a living flood. Hormagaunts that move faster than a human can run, their scything talons capable of disemboweling a fully armored guardsman in a single strike. Termagants that fire living ammunition. Organisms designed to burrow through armor and flesh with equal ease. Warriors that stand twice the height of a man. Their enhanced intelligence making them deadly tacticians as well as ferocious combatants. Carnifexes, living battering rams that crash through defensive positions like tanks made of chitin and rage. And above them all, the monstrous biotitans, creatures so massive they shake the ground with every step, their weapons capable of dissolving entire platoons in streams of corrosive bioacid. The guardsman facing this has his laser gun, his flak armor, his training, such as it is, and the knowledge, growing with every moment, that nothing he does matters on an individual level. You can kill a termagant with a well-placed last shot. You can kill 10, you can kill 100. And there will be 1,000 more behind them, and 1,000 behind those. And the bodies of the ones you killed are already being absorbed by the tyrannid digestion pools that follow the assault wave, broken down into their component amino acids, and repurposed into new organisms that will be deployed against you within hours. This is the part that breaks Guardsmen who survived the initial assault. Not the violence, though the violence is terrible. Not the fear, though the fear is overwhelming. The thing that breaks them is the futility, the growing understanding that they are not fighting a war. They are experiencing an extinction event. The Tyranids do not want their planet. They do not want their resources or their technology or their cultural achievements. They want their biomass. Your body, your blood, your bones, the water in your cells and the proteins in your muscles, that is what the Tyranids have come for. And when they are done, when every living thing on your world has been consumed and processed and converted into more Tyranid organisms, they will move on to the next world, and the next, and the next, until there is nothing left to consume. The Guardsman cannot defeat the Tyranids. He was never expected to. His role, his entire purpose in the defense against a hive fleet, is delay. Hold the line for long enough to allow evacuation of key personnel and assets. Bleed the swarm enough to slow its advance. And force the hive mind to commit more resources to this world so that other worlds might have more time to prepare. You are a speed bump on the highway of galactic consumption. And the really disturbing part, the part that keeps you awake in whatever makeshift shelter you have managed to find between assaults, is the knowledge that even as a speed bump, your effectiveness is measured in hours, not days. The swarm learns, it adapts. Or the organisms that die to your laser gun today will be replaced tomorrow by organisms that are resistant to your laser gun. The tactics that worked this morning will fail this afternoon because the hive mind has already analyzed and countered them. You are playing a game against an opponent that rewrites the rules every time you start to figure them out. And the stakes of the game are the existence of your entire species. Sweet dreams, Guardsman. What the veterans of Tyranid engagements carry with them, the thing that marks them as different from soldiers who have fought any other enemy, is a particular quality of silence. Not the trembling silence that follows an orc assault, which is at least recognizable as a human reaction to overwhelming violence. This is a deeper silence, a stillness, as if some essential part of them has been consumed, along with everything else the Tyranids touched. They do not speak about what they saw, not because it is too painful to describe, though it is, but because the language they would need to describe it does not exist. There are no words in Low Gothic or High Gothic or any other human tongue for the experience of watching a world die. Not in battle, not in fire, but in consumption, in being unmade, molecule by molecule, and absorbed into something vast and cold, and utterly indifferent to everything you are and everything you were and everything you might have been. As the Guardsman who fights Tyranids and survives does not come back whole. Something has been taken from him that he cannot name, something connected to his fundamental belief in the significance of his own existence. Before the Tyranids he believed, even if only in the abstract, that human life mattered. After the Tyranids he knows, with the certainty of direct observation, that to at least one force in this galaxy, our human life is indistinguishable from any other source of raw biological material. You are meat. That is what the Tyranids teach you. You are meat, and the universe is hungry. And then there are the enemies that come not from the material galaxy, but from beyond it, from the warp, from the screaming, churning hellscape of raw emotion and psychic energy that exists parallel to our reality, separated from it by a barrier so thin it sometimes feels like nothing more than a suggestion. The forces of chaos. And it is here, in the shadow of the dark gods, that the Guardsman's experience of war reaches its most profoundly disturbing depths. Fighting orcs is terrifying. Fighting Tyranids is existentially horrifying. But fighting chaos is something else entirely. It is a violation, a corruption of everything you believe to be true about the universe you inhabit. Because chaos does not just attack your body, it attacks your mind, your soul, your understanding of reality itself. And unlike the orcs, who want to fight you, or the tyrannids, who want to eat you, chaos wants to change you, to make you into something you would rather die than become. And the really cruel part is that sometimes, in the heat of battle, in the depths of despair, surrounded by horrors that no human mind was designed to process, dying starts to feel like the more difficult option. The Guardsman deployed against Chaos forces faces a unique set of challenges that no amount of training can adequately prepare him for. The first and most immediate challenge is the enemy itself. Chaos Space Marines, if they are present, are already the most dangerous individual combatants the Guardsman is likely to face. These are post-human warriors, each one a walking engine of destruction encased in corrupted power armor, wielding weapons that can tear through entire squads in seconds. But a Chaos Marine is at least a physical enemy, something that can be targeted, hit, and in theory, killed. The truly terrifying elements of a Chaos incursion are the ones that defy physical engagement entirely. Demons. Entities of pure warp energy given temporary physical form by the emotions and beliefs of mortal beings. They come in forms that the human brain was never designed to perceive, and shapes that twist the laws of geometry and physics into configurations that cause pain simply by being observed. A single demon can drive an entire platoon to madness simply by existing in their proximity. The psychic emanations of a greater demon can induce hallucinations, paranoia, suicidal depression, or maniacal rage in anyone within range, regardless of their training, their faith, or their mental fortitude. The Guardsman's laser gun can hurt a demon sometimes, as if the demon has manifested fully enough to be vulnerable to physical damage. But more often, the Guardsman's only real defense against the warp's incursions is the faith he carries in his heart and the prayers on his lips. And in the 41st millennium, faith is a resource that depletes quickly in the face of evidence that the universe is far more hostile and far more malign than any sermon ever suggested. But the most disturbing aspect of fighting chaos is not the combat itself, and it is what happens to the people around you. Because chaos does not simply destroy, it converts, it whispers, it offers. And the offers it makes are tailored with a precision that speaks to an intelligence far older and far more intimate with human weakness than any mortal strategist could ever be. The soldier next to you, the one you have fought beside for months, and the one who shared his rations with you when yours ran out and covered your position when you were too exhausted to hold your laser gun steady, that soldier can be turned, not through force, not through coercion, through the simple, devastating application of everything he already desires. Horn offers power to the warrior who is tired of being weak. Tzeentch offers knowledge to the scholar who is tired of ignorance. Nurgle offers release to the sufferer who is tired of pain. And Slaanesh offers sensation to the person who is tired of the grey, grinding monotony of existence in the 41st millennium. The Guardsman cannot protect himself from these offers because the protection the Imperium provides, faith and ignorance, are inadequate shields against an enemy that knows exactly where the cracks in those shields are. The Imperium tells its soldiers that chaos does not exist, or that if it does exist, yes, it is merely a form of alien corruption that can be resisted through sufficient devotion to the Emperor. This is, like so much else the Imperium tells its soldiers, a lie. Chaos is not alien. Chaos is profoundly, intimately human. It is born from human emotion. It feeds on human suffering. It grows with every act of cruelty, every moment of despair, every surrender to temptation. The Guardsman fighting chaos is not fighting an external enemy. He is fighting a mirror, a dark and distorted reflection of everything that makes him human, amplified to cosmic proportions and given teeth. This is why commissars are most ruthless in campaigns against chaos. This is why the Ordo Hereticus of the Inquisition watches guard regiments returning from chaos engagements with such paranoid intensity. This is why, in some cases, entire regiments are subjected to mind wipe or summary execution after surviving a major chaos incursion. Not because they failed, because they succeeded. Because they looked into the heart of the warp and came back with eyes that had seen too much, and minds that had been touched by things that no amount of debriefing can expunge. The Imperium protects itself from the knowledge of chaos by destroying the people who acquire that knowledge, even if those people are its own loyal soldiers. The Guardsman who fights chaos and survives carries something with him for the rest of his life, however short that might be: a knowledge, an awareness, and the understanding that the universe is not merely hostile but actively malevolent, that the dark gods are real and they are paying attention and they are interested in him specifically, not as a warrior to be defeated, but as a soul to be claimed. That knowledge is a wound that never heals. And the Imperium, in its infinite wisdom, treats the wounded the same way it treats the broken. It uses them until they stop working, and then it replaces them. Thus, the Guardsmen who survive chaos campaigns and are not subsequently mind-wiped or executed often display behaviors that their comrades find disturbing. They pray more than other soldiers, but their prayers have a quality of desperation that goes beyond normal devotion. They flinch at shadows. They avoid mirrors. They have difficulty sleeping in the dark, not because they fear what might be lurking in the darkness, but because they fear what the darkness might whisper to them when they are most vulnerable. Some develop an obsessive need to confess, seeking out regimental chaplains and confiding sins, both real and imagined, in a continuous stream of guilt and self-recrimination that speaks to a mind that has been fundamentally destabilized by contact with forces it was never equipped to comprehend. The Imperium does not acknowledge any of this, and the official position of the Astra Militarum is that chaos is a form of alien corruption that can be resisted through faith and discipline, and that any guardsman who is properly devoted to the Emperor is immune to its influence. This is a lie that serves two purposes. First, it maintains the fiction that the Imperium's soldiers are adequate to the task assigned to them, which is necessary for morale. Second, it provides justification for the execution of any soldier who shows signs of corruption, since if faith is a perfect shield, then any soldier who is corrupted must have been lacking in faith, and therefore deserves whatever punishment is deemed appropriate. The circularity of this logic is not lost on the Guardsmen themselves, but pointing it out would require questioning imperial doctrine, and questioning imperial doctrine is heresy, and heresy is punishable by death. The wheel turns if the system perpetuates itself, and the Guardsman, trapped within it, learns to keep his questions to himself and his nightmares to the small, dark hours of the night when the only witness is the Emperor, who may or may not be listening. One of the most remarkable and most disturbing aspects of the Imperial Guard is the sheer diversity of its regiments. The Astra Militarum draws soldiers from every conceivable kind of world, every conceivable kind of culture, and every conceivable kind of military tradition. And the conditions that produce these regiments are, in many cases, almost as horrifying as the wars they are sent to fight. Consider the death cause of Krieg. Their homeworld of Krieg was once an imperial world of reasonable prosperity, until a devastating civil war ended with the loyalist faction, lacking the military strength to defeat the traitors by conventional means, resorting to the use of atomic weapons on their own planet. And they bombed their own world into a nuclear wasteland rather than allow it to fall to heresy. And then they continued to live there, in the irradiated ruins of what had once been a functioning civilization. The people of Krieg built a new society entirely around the concept of atonement. They feel, collectively and individually, that their world's treachery during the Civil War is a stain that can only be cleansed through sacrifice. Endless, grinding, self-annihilating sacrifice. And the death cause does not retreat, ever. Not because they are brave in the conventional sense, though their courage is undeniable, but because they have been raised since birth to believe that their lives are a debt owed to the Emperor, and that death in his service is not a tragedy, but a payment. A balancing of the cosmic ledger. Their gas masks, those featureless, emotionless faces, that have become one of the most iconic images in the Warhammer 40,000 setting are more than just protection against the toxic environment of their homeworld. They are a deliberate erasure of individual identity. A Death Korps soldier is not a person. He is a unit, a component in a machine designed for one purpose: to grind forward through the enemy's defenses with a relentlessness that makes even orcs look easily discouraged. Their specialty is siege warfare and attrition. They excel at the kind of grinding, the trench-based conflict that chews through men and material with equal indifference. They do not need to be motivated. They do not need commissars to keep them in line, and in fact, commissars assigned to Death Korps regiments often find their role reversed, not preventing soldiers from fleeing, but preventing soldiers from throwing their lives away in suicidal attacks that serve no tactical purpose. The Death Korps wants to die, not out of despair, but out of a profound and deeply unsettling conviction that death is their ultimate purpose. They are born to atone, and atonement requires blood, and the only blood they have to offer is their own. Their methods reflect this philosophy. When the Death Korps is deployed to break a siege, they do not look for clever solutions or elegant maneuvers. They dig, they entrench, they advance their trench lines inch by inch, yard by yard, is absorbing casualties with a stoic indifference that unnerves allies and enemies alike. Their artillery crews fire with mechanical precision until their guns overheat and their ammunition is exhausted, and then they fix bayonets and join the infantry advance. Their engineers clear minefields by walking through them, accepting the inevitable casualties as the cost of progress. Their officers lead from the front, not because doctrine requires it, but because dying alongside their men is considered a privilege, a faster path to the atonement they all seek. Other regiments find the Death Korps deeply unsettling to fight alongside. There is something fundamentally wrong in the estimation of soldiers from more conventional backgrounds, about warriors who feel no fear, not because they are brave, but because they have already accepted their death as a foregone conclusion. The Katakans think they are insane. The Cadians respect their discipline, but find their fatalism disturbing. Even the Commissariat, that bastion of inflexible authority, approaches the Death Korps with a certain cautious respect, understanding that the usual tools of motivation and punishment are meaningless when applied to soldiers who actively desire the most extreme punishment available. Then there are the Katakan jungle fighters, and their story is disturbing in an entirely different way. Katakan is a death world, one of the most hostile environments in the Imperium. Everything on Katakan is trying to kill you. The plants are carnivorous, the insects are venomous, the animals are predatory, and the very atmosphere requires constant vigilance to survive. Children on Katakan begin learning survival skills before they can walk, and the mortality rate before adulthood is staggeringly high. Those who survive are, by any reasonable standard, among the toughest human beings in the galaxy. They do not need lasguns to be dangerous. A Katakan with a knife is already one of the most effective individual soldiers in the Imperial Guard. But the cost of producing these soldiers is measured in dead children. The population of Katakan pays for its military excellence with a childhood mortality rate that would be considered genocidal on any civilized world. For every Katakan jungle fighter who reaches adulthood and joins the Imperial Guard, dozens of children died on the jungle floor, consumed by the planet that birthed them. The Imperium does not consider this a problem. The Imperium considers this an efficient screening process. The weak are weeded out by nature, and only the strong survive to serve. The dead children are not casualties. They are the manufacturing cost of elite soldiers. The Vostroyan firstborn carry their own particular burden. Their world of Vostroya refused to send troops during the Horus Heresy, choosing to maintain its industrial output instead. But that refusal has haunted them for 10,000 years. As penance, Vostroya committed to sending its firstborn sons to the Imperial Guard in perpetuity, a blood debt that has been paid generation after generation for 10 millennia. Every family on Vostroya knows that their eldest son will be taken, that he will march away in his ornate uniform carrying his heirloom lasgun, and that in all probability he will never return. The grief of that loss is woven into the fabric of Vostroyan culture as a permanent scar on the collective psyche of an entire civilization, inflicted not by war, but by guilt, by the knowledge that their ancestors chose safety over duty, and that every generation since has been paying for that choice. The Mordian Iron Guard, raised on a tidally locked world shrouded in eternal darkness on one side, maintain their sanity and their discipline through an almost pathological commitment to order. Their parade ground precision, their immaculate uniforms, their rigid formations, these are not merely military traditions. They are psychological survival mechanisms. In a world of perpetual night, where the darkness breeds both literal and metaphorical horrors, the Iron Guard maintains its humanity through the imposition of structure. They stand in perfect lines because the alternative is to dissolve into the chaos that presses in on all sides. Their uniforms are spotless because filth represents the decay they fight against. But their discipline is absolute because any crack, any deviation, any surrender to disorder represents the beginning of the end. Every regiment has its own particular flavor of suffering. Every regiment is produced by a world that has been shaped, warped, and scarred by the demands of the Imperium's endless wars. And every guardsman carries the weight of their world's particular history, their world's particular trauma into a conflict that will add new traumas to the collection. Oh, and if you think the average guardsman has it bad, let me introduce you to the true bottom rung of the imperial military hierarchy. Let me tell you about the penal legions. The penal legions are exactly what they sound like. Military units composed entirely of criminals, dissidents, failed soldiers, and anyone else the Imperium has deemed unfit for normal service, but not quite unfit enough to execute outright. They are the Guard's garbage disposal. At the place where the Imperium sends the human refuse it cannot be bothered to shoot, but does not care enough to rehabilitate. Mass murderers serve alongside petty thieves. Rebellious Planetary Defense Force soldiers march next to political prisoners whose only crime was asking the wrong question to the wrong person at the wrong time. The breaking of any military regulation, up to and including murder, can result in assignment to a penal battalion rather than execution. It's because even the Imperium occasionally recognizes that a body with a laser gun is more useful than a body in a grave. The conditions within a penal legion make the regular guard look like a pleasure cruise through a paradise world. Discipline is enforced through means that would make even the harshest commissar uncomfortable. Electro-scourges, explosive collars, auto-injectors loaded with frenzon and slort and other combat drugs that turn the legionnaires into howling berserkers, too crazed to feel fear or pain or anything else that might make them hesitate before charging into a kill zone. Some penal legions use explosive control collars that can be detonated remotely by the unit's overseer if any legionnaire attempts to flee, refuse orders, or simply annoy the overseer sufficiently. The lives of penal legionnaires are considered to have less value than the ammunition they expend, and their deployment reflects this assessment with a bluntness that even the Imperium's usual callousness finds difficult to match. Penal legions are given the worst assignments: mine clearance, forlorn hope assaults on fortified positions, diversionary attacks designed to draw enemy fire away from the main advance, which is a polite way of saying they are used as bait. In sieges, they are often sent forward to identify enemy firing positions by the simple method of walking into the kill zone and seeing who gets shot. The information gathered from their deaths is then used to plan the actual assault, which will be carried out by regular troops while the surviving legionnaires, if there are any, are sent forward again. Decimation, the practice of executing one in every 10 soldiers as punishment for a unit's failure, is still used in some penal legions. As the term comes from ancient Terran military history, and it is applied in the 41st millennium with the same cold mathematical logic that inspired its invention thousands of years ago. If a penal legion fails to advance, fails to take an objective, or simply fails to die in the correct location at the correct time, 1 in 10 of its surviving members may be randomly selected and executed in front of the others as motivation for improved performance. This is considered an acceptable management technique. The redemption offered to penal legionnaires is simple and final. If you survive your service, and the length of that service is usually undefined, deliberately so, your crimes are considered absolved, and you may be returned to regular military status. In practice, the survival rate in penal legions is so low that this offer of redemption is functionally meaningless. A carrot dangled in front of a donkey that is destined for the slaughterhouse, regardless of which direction it walks. And then there are the conscripts, not the regular recruits drawn from planetary defense forces and tithe obligations, but the mass conscriptions that occur when a world is directly threatened and every available body is pressed into service. These are not soldiers in any meaningful sense. They are civilians who have been given a weapon, whilst a brief and largely useless introduction to its operation, and pointed in the direction of the enemy. Their training consists of however long it takes to load a lasgun and understand the concept of pulling the trigger. Their equipment is whatever the Munitorum can scrape together, which may or may not include a complete set of flak armor, may or may not include a lasgun that actually functions, and almost certainly does not include any of the support equipment that regular guardsmen take for granted. Mass conscription on such a scale that entire hive cities are emptied has been documented in imperial records. Billions of people stripped from their lives and thrown into the meat grinder, not because they have any particular aptitude for warfare, but because the war has come to their doorstep and the alternative to fighting is being eaten, corrupted, or exterminated. Where these conscript waves are used in the same way that the orcs use their Gretchen cannon fodder, as a living screen, a wall of expendable bodies whose purpose is to absorb enemy fire and slow the enemy's advance long enough for the regular forces behind them to prepare their response. The mortality rate among hastily raised conscript units is, as you might expect, catastrophic. Many die before they ever reach the front lines, killed by their own incompetence with the weapons they have been given, or by the disease and exposure that accompany the chaotic conditions of mass mobilization. Those who reach the fighting often die within minutes of their first engagement, overwhelmed by enemies they were never trained to face, using equipment they barely understand, under the command of officers who view them as little more than mobile sandbags. Their deaths are recorded, if they are recorded at all, as statistical abstractions. Numbers on a casualty report that will be filed by an adept who did not know their names and will not remember their existence by the time the ink has dried. This, perhaps more than anything else, is the thing that makes the guardsman's life so profoundly disturbing. Not the enemies, not the equipment, not even the commissar. It is the knowledge that the Imperium views your life as a commodity, a resource to be managed, allocated, and expended according to the needs of the moment. You are not a person to the Imperium. You are a unit of combat potential, measured in terms of how much damage you can absorb, how much firepower you can deliver, and how long you can remain operational before you need to be replaced. The Imperium does not love you. It does not care about you. It needs you, desperately and immediately, but it does not value you as an individual, and it never will. As you are the most essential component of the Imperium's survival, and simultaneously the most expendable thing in its inventory. That paradox, the simultaneous indispensability and disposability of the individual guardsman, is the central tragedy of the Astra Militarum. The Imperium cannot survive without its guardsmen, and it treats them as though they are worthless. Both of these things are true at the same time, and the guardsman lives his entire service in the space between them. What behind all of this, behind the fighting and the dying and the suffering, stands the Departamento Munitorum. And the Departamento Munitorum is perhaps the most quietly horrifying institution in the entire Imperium. Because unlike the enemies that kill guardsmen on the battlefield, the Munitorum kills them through paperwork. The Departamento Munitorum is the logistical backbone of the Astra Militarum. It is responsible for everything: recruitment, training, equipment supply, transportation, deployment, rations, medical care, communications, the raising of new regiments and the dissolution of depleted ones, the manufacture and distribution of every single weapon, every single round of ammunition, every single power pack, every single set of flak armor, every single combat ration, and every single can of sacred machine oil used by the largest military force in the history of the galaxy. And it is also a bureaucratic nightmare of such staggering proportions that the human mind recoils from attempting to comprehend its scope. The Munitorum employs billions of administrators across 1 million worlds, and yet it cannot tell you how many soldiers it has. It processes trillions of requisition forms per year, and yet regiments routinely go without basic supplies for months or years at a time because the relevant paperwork was lost, misfiled, or buried under a pile of other paperwork on an administrator's desk on a world 2 sectors away. Distress calls from invaded worlds are processed through the Munitorum's bureaucratic hierarchy, passed from system command to subsector command to sector command, each step adding delay and potential for error, until fleets dispatched in response sometimes arrive to find that the world they were sent to defend was destroyed years or even decades before the relief force was assembled. Oh, think about that. Decades. A world can be screaming for help, its population being slaughtered, its guardsmen dying in the trenches, and the Imperium's response can take decades to arrive because the paperwork got held up. This is not a failure of the system. This is the system working as designed. The Departamento Munitorum was built to manage logistics on a galactic scale, and at a galactic scale, the death of a single world is a rounding error, an acceptable loss, a statistical fluctuation in the vast spreadsheet of Imperial resource management. For the individual guardsman, the Munitorum's dysfunction manifests in ways that range from mildly inconvenient to directly lethal. Supply shipments that arrive containing winter gear for a desert campaign and desert gear for an Arctic deployment. Ammunition requisitions that are filled with the wrong caliber rounds. Ration packs that expired centuries ago and preserved by the Emperor's grace, and whatever unidentifiable preservatives the Munitorum uses, but still tasting of nothing so much as despair in edible form. Medical supplies that are perpetually insufficient, resulting in field surgeries performed without anesthesia and wounds dressed with whatever clean fabric can be scavenged from the dead. Replacement troops that are shipped to the wrong planet, the wrong sector, the wrong war, and arriving in battle zones they were never trained for, and dying in conflicts they were never meant to fight. The novel 15 Hours, which I mentioned earlier, uses this as its central premise. A young guardsman named Arvin Larn is deployed to a war zone on a planet called Brucherok due to a bureaucratic error in a simple transposition of numbers in the Munitorum's filing system that sends him to a trench war against millions of orcs instead of the relatively low-intensity counterinsurgency operation he was actually assigned to. Nobody notices the error. Nobody corrects it. The Munitorum's systems simply process Larn's deployment as one more line item in one more logistics report and move on to the next requisition form. The fact that this error condemns a teenager to almost certain death is not the system's concern. The system was not designed to care about individual lives. It was designed to move bodies from point A to point B with maximum efficiency and minimum oversight, and by those metrics, the system is working perfectly. The guardsman lives and dies at the mercy of a bureaucracy that does not know his name. Yet his fate is determined not by the enemy he faces or the courage he displays, but by the accuracy of a filing clerk on a world he has never heard of, working in an office he will never see, processing forms he will never read. The most dangerous weapon in the Imperium is not the laser gun or the bolter or the battle cannon of a Lehman Russ tank. It is the quill pen of an administrative servitor, inscribing a number in the wrong column of a deployment manifest, condemning 1,000 guardsmen to a death they never should have faced. And the Munitorum does not apologize. It does not acknowledge its errors. It does not grieve for the lives lost to its dysfunction. It simply processes the casualty reports, updates the personnel files, requisitions replacement troops, and continues the endless, grinding, paper-powered machinery of Imperial logistics. The guardsman is a number going in, a number during service and a number going out. And the Munitorum treats all three of those numbers with exactly the same level of emotional investment, which is to say, none. Some regiments have been entirely forgotten by the Departamento Munitorum. Lost in the vast filing systems of imperial bureaucracy, these forgotten regiments continue to exist, fighting wars that nobody remembers assigning them to, on worlds that nobody remembers sending them to, without supplies or reinforcements or any contact with the broader Imperium. They fight because fighting is all they know how to do. They die because dying is the only alternative to fighting. And somewhere in the bowels of the Munitorum's administrative complex, their file sits in a dusty cabinet, waiting for an adept who will never come to process a form that will never be filed. We should talk about what this does to a person. Not physically, though the physical toll is immense, but mentally, psychologically, spiritually, if you are inclined to use that word. Yeah, because the Guardsman does not only carry a laser gun and a set of flak armor, he carries something far heavier. He carries the accumulated weight of everything he has seen and done and survived and lost. And the Imperium provides no mechanism for setting that weight down. There is no mental health support in the Imperial Guard, not in any form that a modern person would recognize. No counselors, no therapy, no safe spaces where a Guardsman can talk about the nightmares that wake him screaming, or the way his hands shake when he tries to eat, or the faces of the friends he watched die that now appear in every crowd and every shadow and every reflection in standing water. The Imperium's approach to psychological trauma is identical to its approach to physical injury. If you can still fight, you fight. If you cannot fight, you are replaced. The concept of post-traumatic stress, of the mind's delayed reaction to unbearable horror, does not exist in Imperial military doctrine. Right, a Guardsman who flinches at loud noises is a coward. A Guardsman who cannot sleep is malingering. A Guardsman who breaks down weeping in the middle of a meal, overcome by a memory that strikes without warning, is displaying weakness that the commissar may or may not decide to address with his bolt pistol. And so, the Guardsman learns to carry his invisible wounds the same way he carries his visible ones, silently, stoically, and with the grim understanding that acknowledging them would be more dangerous than enduring them. He develops coping mechanisms that are crude but effective. He drinks when alcohol is available, which in the Imperial Guard is more often than the regulations suggest. He gambles with his fellow soldiers, wagering ration packs and personal trinkets on games of chance that provide a temporary distraction from the grinding anxiety of waiting for the next engagement. He develops rituals, personal superstitions, lucky charms, and repetitive behaviors that give him the illusion of control over an existence that is entirely beyond his power to influence. He holds his laser gun a certain way. He puts his boots on in a certain order. He touches the Imperial eagle stamped on his identification tags before every battle and whispers a prayer that is half devotion and half desperate bargaining with a god who may or may not be listening. Some Guardsmen find genuine faith, not the rote, our mechanical religiosity enforced by the commissar and the regimental chaplain, but a real, living belief in the God Emperor that provides genuine comfort and genuine strength. In a universe where the warp is real and faith has measurable effects, this is not as irrational as it might seem. The Guardsman who truly believes, who carries the Emperor's light in his heart with the sincere conviction of a true follower, can draw strength from that belief that transcends the physical. Yet he can face horrors that would shatter a less faithful mind and endure them, not because he is braver or stronger, but because he believes, with every fiber of his being, that his suffering has meaning, that the Emperor sees him, that his sacrifice matters. Whether this belief is justified, whether the Emperor of mankind, entombed upon the golden throne on distant Terra, actually perceives or cares about the individual prayers of individual Guardsmen on worlds 10,000 light-years from Sol, is a question that the setting deliberately leaves unanswered. But the belief itself is real, and its effects are real, and for many Guardsmen, it is the only thing that keeps them walking forward into the dark. Others find no such comfort. They fight and suffer and endure without the cushion of faith, driven only by survival instinct and the bonds they form with the soldiers around them. These guardsmen are often the most effective fighters and the most damaged people, because they have stripped away every illusion and every consolation and reduced their existence to its most basic elements. Fight, survive, protect the person next to you, die when you can no longer do any of those things. There is a terrifying clarity in that reduction, a kind of freedom that comes from having nothing left to lose, and the guardsmen who reach that state are among the most dangerous individuals the Imperium can deploy, not because they are fearless, but because they have moved beyond fear into a territory that has no name, a place where the only remaining motivation is the simple, brutal refusal to stop existing. The rare guardsman who survives long enough to be considered a veteran, meaning he has fought through multiple campaigns and multiple deployments over a period of years or decades, is a creature unlike anything his former civilian self would recognize. His eyes are different, not just older, but fundamentally changed, more carrying a depth and a distance that civilian acquaintances find unsettling. He moves differently, with a controlled economy of motion that speaks of a body conditioned by years of combat to waste nothing, not a single step, not a single gesture, not a single calorie. He speaks less than he used to, and when he does speak, his words are precise, clipped, carefully chosen, as if he is rationing language the same way he rations ammunition. And he sleeps badly and wakes quickly, and his hand reaches for his laser gun before his eyes are fully open, every single time, without exception. These veterans are the backbone of their regiments, the experienced soldiers who keep the raw recruits alive long enough to become useful, who know the rhythms of battle well enough to anticipate the enemy's movements and position their squads accordingly, who carry the institutional memory that the Munitorum's bureaucracy cannot provide. They are respected by their peers, valued by their officers, and observed with wary caution by the commissars, who understand that a veteran guardsman who has survived everything the galaxy can throw at him is not the sort of person who will meekly accept a bolt round to the back of the head. But they are also broken, in ways that are visible and ways that are not. They carry the names of dead friends, like stones in their pockets, accumulated over years of fighting until the weight of the dead becomes the dominant feature of their inner landscape. They have nightmares that are not imaginary, but memories, vivid and precise, of moments that no amount of time can blunt. They have tics and habits and fears that they can explain to no one, because the experiences that produce them are beyond civilian comprehension. And they have a loneliness that is absolute and permanent. The loneliness of a person who has seen and done things that have placed him forever outside the circle of normal human experience, who can never fully explain what he has been through to anyone who was not there, and who watches each new batch of recruits arrive with the quiet knowledge that most of them will be dead within the month. This is the hidden cost of the Imperial Guard, not the bodies, which the Imperium can always replace, but the minds, the souls, the humanity that is ground away, campaign by campaign, battle by battle, until what remains is not quite a person anymore, but something harder and colder and more resilient, something shaped by the forge of war into a tool that the Imperium can use but never repair. The Guardsman gives the Imperium everything: his home, his youth, his innocence, his peace of mind, his ability to sleep without screaming, his capacity for trust and connection and simple human joy. He gives all of it, willingly or unwillingly. Yet when the Imperium takes it without acknowledgement or gratitude, and when there is nothing left to give, the Imperium marks his file as depleted and sends for a replacement. And yet, despite everything, despite the inadequate equipment and the lies and the commissars and the nightmarish enemies and the soul-crushing bureaucracy, despite all of it, Guardsmen fight. They hold the line. They fix bayonets and charge into the teeth of impossible odds. And sometimes, they win. This is the part of the Guardsman's story that does not get enough attention, Because it complicates the narrative of despair that the setting so often emphasizes. The Imperial Guard wins battles. Not always, not easily, and never cheaply, but it wins. Because for all the setting's focus on the superhuman capabilities of Space Marines and the terrifying power of chaos and the implacable hunger of the Tyranids, the vast majority of the Imperium's wars are fought and won by ordinary men and women carrying laser guns and wearing flak armor. The Space Marines are the scalpel. The Guard is the hammer. And in the grinding, attritional warfare that defines the 41st millennium, the hammer is the tool that sees the most use. The Third War for Armageddon is perhaps the most famous example. But when the Orc warlord Gazkul Thraka returned to the hive world of Armageddon with a force that made his first invasion look like a scouting party, it was the Imperial Guard that bore the brunt of the defense. Under the legendary Commissar Yarrick, Guardsmen held the walls of Armageddon's hive cities against an onslaught that should have overwhelmed them in days. They held for months, for years. Not because they had superior weapons or superior training or superior numbers, but because they refused to stop fighting. Because Yarrick, that grizzled, one-armed, iron-willed bastard of a commissar, stood on the walls and told them they would hold, and something in his voice made them believe it, and something in their belief made it true. Yarrick is worth dwelling on for a moment, because he represents the other side of the commissar archetype, the side that the Guardsman's stories celebrate rather than fear. Yarrick lost his arm to an Orc warboss and replaced it with the warboss's own power claw, ripped from the dead greenskin's body and grafted onto his own flesh. He lost an eye and replaced it with a bionic that could fire a laser beam because the Orcs believed his gaze could kill, and Yarrick decided that if the greenskins were going to fear his eyes, he might as well give them a reason. He fought on the front lines alongside his soldiers, not behind them. He led charges, he held breaches, yet he became such a figure of terror to the Orcs that Gazkul Thraka himself became obsessed with defeating him, not because Yarrick was strategically important, but because the mere existence of a human who refused to be afraid was an affront to everything the Orc warlord believed about the natural order of the universe. Yarrick proved that a commissar does not have to be the enemy of his own soldiers to be effective. That leadership can come from the front rather than from behind a bolt pistol. That inspiring your soldiers is more effective than terrorizing them. He is the exception, and the Imperial Guard loves him precisely because he is exceptional, because he represents the possibility, however rare, that the system can produce someone who cares about the people under his command rather than just the objectives they have been assigned to achieve. The fall of Cadia is another example, though in this case, the victory was spiritual rather than tactical. When Abaddon the Despoiler launched his 13th Black Crusade, Cadia was the target. Cadia, the fortress world that had guarded the gate to the Eye of Terror for 10,000 years. The Cadian shock troops, the most famous and most respected regiment in the Imperial Guard, fought against overwhelming chaos forces with a fury and a determination that earned the respect of even the Space Marines who fought alongside them. While in the end, Cadia fell, the planet itself was destroyed, shattered by the impact of a blackstone fortress driven into its surface. But the Cadian Guard did not break. Even as their world died beneath them, they fought. The planet broke before the Guard did. That phrase, uttered by Lord Castellan Sakar Creed in the final hours of the defense, has become one of the most famous quotations in the entire setting, and it speaks to something profound about the human capacity for endurance. Whilst the Guardsman does not win because he is powerful, he wins because he endures, because when every other option has been exhausted, when the ammunition runs out and the armor fails, and the enemy closes in, and death seems not just likely, but certain, the Guardsman does the one thing that no weapon can accomplish, and no amount of alien technology can replicate. He keeps going. He picks up his bayonet, and he charges. He throws his empty laser gun at the enemy, and reaches for his combat knife. Yet he uses his fists, his teeth, his body. Whatever he has left, he throws into the fight, not because he expects to survive, but because fighting is the last meaningful act available to a human being in a universe determined to grind humanity into dust. There is a quotation attributed to an unnamed guardsman that I think captures this better than anything else in the setting. The words are simple, they are not eloquent, but they do not have the grandeur of a Space Marine's war cry or the weight of a Primarch's pronouncement. But they contain a truth that echoes across the entire Warhammer 40,000 universe. The guardsman said this. He said, "We are the first, the last, and often the only line of defense the Imperium has against what is out there. You and that fine piece of Imperial weaponry you hold in your hands is all that is keeping humanity alive." And that is the thing. That is the disturbing, heartbreaking, awe-inspiring truth at the center of the Guardsman's existence. They are all that stands between humanity and extinction. Not the Space Marines, who are too few. Not the Adeptus Mechanicus, who are too concerned with their own agendas. Not the Inquisition, who are too busy hunting internal threats. The Guard, the billions upon billions of ordinary men and women who hold the line because if they do not, there is no one left to hold it. When every world that survives a Tyranid assault survives because Guardsmen died in the trenches. Every city that weathers an Orc invasion weathers it because Guardsmen stood on the walls. Every system that resists a Chaos incursion resists it because Guardsmen fought against horrors that their training told them did not exist and kept fighting even after they learned the truth. The Imperium of man, for all its vastness, for all its technology, for all its superhuman warriors and divine protectors, rests on a foundation of ordinary human courage. And that foundation is replenished every year, every month, every day by the tithe, by the endless stream of new bodies pulled from 1,000,000 worlds and shipped to 1,000,000 battlefronts to fight and bleed and die so that humanity might survive one more day. It is easy to look at the Guardsman's situation and see only the horror, the inadequate equipment, the callous leadership, the impossible odds, the inevitable death. And all of those things are real. They are part of the story, and they deserve to be told honestly. But there is another part of the story, equally real and equally important, and it is the part that makes the Imperial Guard not just the most disturbing faction in Warhammer 40,000, but arguably the most heroic. These are not demigods. They have not been gifted with genetic enhancements or mystical powers or ancient alien technology. They are people, just people. And they face the most terrible things the galaxy can produce, and they stand their ground, and they fight. Not because they are fearless, they are terrified. Every one of them. From the greenest conscript to the most grizzled veteran, fear is their constant companion, as familiar as the weight of their laser gun and the smell of recycled air in a troop transport. They fight because the alternative is worse, because the Orcs will not stop if the line breaks, but because the Tyranids will not be satisfied with one world, because Chaos will not be content with one victory, because the darkness is real and it is hungry and it is patient, and it is always, always, always pressing inward, and the only thing between it and the extermination of everything humanity has ever built is a line of soldiers in flak armor, holding laser guns that the rest of the galaxy mocks as flashlights, and refusing to take one single step backward. That is the disturbing reality of being a guardsman in Warhammer 40,000. It is not just the dying, it is the knowledge that the dying matters, that every guardsman who falls buys one more second for the species, that every trench held and every line defended and every last stand fought to the bitter end is a victory, however small, in a war that can never truly be won, but must never, ever be lost. The guardsman does not fight for glory. He fights for survival. Not his own, or because his survival was never part of the plan, but the survival of everyone else. Every civilian on every world behind the line. Every child who will never know the name of the soldier who died so that they could live. Every unborn generation that will inherit a galaxy still full of horrors, but still, miraculously, still, containing a humanity that endures. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But in the trenches of that war, there is also something else, something quieter, something easily overlooked amid the thunder of artillery and the screaming of the dying, something that the Imperium, in all its vast bureaucratic indifference, could never quantify or catalogue or file in triplicate. There is courage, not the grand theatrical courage of heroes from myths and legends, but the small, stubborn, unglamorous courage of ordinary people who are simply too tired, too scared, or too angry to stop fighting. That courage is the Imperial Guard's greatest weapon. Greater than the Leman Russ, greater than the Baneblade, greater than 1,000,000 lasguns fired in unison. And it is the one weapon that the enemies of humanity, for all their power, for all their numbers, for all their ancient malice and cosmic hunger, have never found a way to defeat. The Guardsman carries that weapon in a place no commissar can inspect and no enemy can reach. And as long as he carries it, and as long as one more Guardsman stands up from behind one more burning barricade and levels one more lasgun at one more impossible enemy and fires one more shot into the darkness, humanity survives, not thrives, not prospers, not conquers, survives. And in the 41st millennium, survival is the only victory that matters. So the next time you think about the Warhammer 40,000 universe, the next time you lose yourself in the vast and terrible grandeur of it all, as the galaxy-spanning conflicts and the godlike entities and the cosmic struggles between order and chaos, take a moment to think about the Guardsman. The ordinary person in the ordinary uniform with the ordinary weapon, standing in an ordinary trench on an ordinary world, facing something that is anything but ordinary. Think about what it takes to stand there. Think about what it costs. And think about the fact that somewhere, right now, in the fiction of this universe, billions of people exactly like that are doing exactly that. And the only reward they will ever receive is the knowledge that because they stood, because they fought, because they refused to run even when every fiber of their being screamed at them to flee, humanity got to see one more sunrise. That is the disturbing reality. And that is also, in its own terrible way, the hope. There is a story told in guard barracks across the Imperium, one of those oral traditions that passes from veteran to recruit in the quiet hours between battles, evolving with each retelling, but always carrying the same essential truth. The story goes that somewhere, on a world whose name has been lost to the grinding gears of Imperial record-keeping, a single platoon of Guardsmen held a bridge against an enemy assault for 3 days. They were outnumbered. They were outgunned. They had no artillery support, no armor, no air cover, nothing but their lasguns and their flak armor and whatever fortifications they could improvise from the rubble of the surrounding buildings. They held because the bridge was the only crossing point for a river that separated the enemy from a refugee column. 200,000 civilians fleeing the advance. And if the bridge fell, those civilians would be caught in the open and slaughtered. Nobody ordered them to hold that bridge. The order they received was to fall back to the secondary defensive line, 3 miles to the rear, where the rest of the regiment was digging in. Holding the bridge was not part of the plan. It was not tactically sound. It was, by any reasonable military assessment, a waste of resources that could be better deployed elsewhere. The platoon commander, a young lieutenant whose name varies with each telling of the story, looked at the refugee column, looked at the bridge, looked at his soldiers, and made a decision that no tactical manual could justify and no bureaucratic calculus could endorse. They held. For 3 days, they held. Against wave after wave of enemy assault, they held. They held when the ammunition ran low, and they started rationing power packs, 3 shots per Guardsman per hour. They held when the enemy brought up heavy weapons, and the bridge's stone railings shattered into fragments that became secondary projectiles, tearing through the platoon's dwindling ranks. Yet they held when the lieutenant was killed on the 2nd day, and the sergeant took over, and they held when the sergeant was killed on the morning of the 3rd day, and a corporal whose name nobody can agree on took over. They held until the last refugee had crossed the river and the evacuation was complete, and then, only then, they fell back. 7 guardsmen walked off that bridge, out of an original platoon strength of 30. 7 guardsmen, limping, bleeding, carrying their wounded on their backs, because nobody gets left behind. Not on that bridge, not that day. Is the story true? Nobody knows. It might be. It might be a composite of a dozen different battles, a dozen different bridges, a dozen different platoons that made the same impossible choice and paid the same impossible price. It does not matter whether it is true. What matters is that guardsmen believe it is true, that they carry it with them like a talisman, as a proof of concept for the idea that individual courage can matter in a universe that seems designed to prove the opposite. The story says that guardsmen are more than numbers, more than resources, more than the ammunition they expend and the casualties they absorb. The story says that a guardsman can choose to be a hero, even when the Imperium has not asked him to be, even when the bureaucracy does not require it, even when the commissar is not watching. The story says that the choice to protect the innocent, to stand between the helpless and the darkness, is a choice that belongs to the guardsman himself, not to the Imperium, not to the Munitorum, not to the general staff, but to the ordinary man in the ordinary trench with the ordinary weapon, who looks at the world around him and decides that this is where he stands. That choice is the guardsman's true weapon, more powerful than the lasgun, more enduring than the flak armor, or more reliable than the Lehman Russ. The choice to be human in a universe that is trying very hard to grind humanity out of existence. The choice to care about something beyond personal survival, beyond tactical objectives, beyond the cold mathematics of imperial resource management. The choice to see the person next to you in the trench as a brother or a sister, rather than a unit of combat potential, and to fight for them with everything you have, not because the Emperor demands it, though he does, but because it is the right thing to do. In the end, that is what the Imperial Guard is. Not a military organization, though it functions as one. Not a tool of imperial policy, though it serves as one. The Imperial Guard is a collection of choices, billions upon billions of individual human beings, each of whom, in their own small way, in the midst of unimaginable horror and suffering, chose to keep fighting, chose to hold the line, chose to fix bayonets and charge one more time, chose to be the wall between humanity and the darkness, even knowing that the wall would be ground down and rebuilt, and ground down again, forever. The grim darkness of the far future is real. The war is eternal. The suffering is beyond measure. But in the trenches of that eternal war, ordinary people are performing extraordinary acts of courage every single day, and they are doing it without genetic enhancement, without power armor, without any of the advantages that the setting's more glamorous factions take for granted. They are doing it with nothing but their humanity, and that, in the final analysis, is the most disturbing and the most inspiring thing about being a guardsman in Warhammer 40,000. The horror is real, and so is the heroism, and neither one makes any sense without the other. If you enjoyed this journey into the life of the Imperial Guard, well, consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into the darkest corners of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Your support means the galaxy to me, and together we will keep exploring the grim darkness of the far future, one story at a time. Until next time, keep the faith, hold the line, and remember that the Emperor protects.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.